chapter of the Bible. We've been here. This is actually, I think this is week 5. Yeah, week 5. It's just one chapter. There's so much. Hebrews 11, known as the faith chapter, right? And the writer of Hebrews, and we say the writer of Hebrews because we don't know who wrote Hebrews. We have some ideas. There's some good possibilities. It was a second generation Christian that was close to the apostles. Could have been Barnabas, could have been Apollos, could have even been Priscilla, which I really like that option. Could have been a lot, could be a couple of other names, but we know it was an influential person that had connection with the apostles, but we're not real sure. Probably writing to the house church in Rome, and the word Hebrews, the title Hebrews, we title these letters according to who they're going to or who wrote them. So this is where it's going to. So it was to Jewish Christians is who this letter was written to. But it's just full. It's full of this idea of, let me encourage you not to give up on your faith. That's the purpose of the book of Hebrews, and it's just chock full of wonderful information for us. But chapter 11 is bringing this idea of persevering faith together, because these people in probably Rome are being persecuted, and they're ready to be done. They're ready to walk away. And so there's a lot of talk about not shrinking back and not letting go, and that Jesus is enough. But then the writer does in chapter 11 kind of like, I wish it could almost be like a movie, it'd be like little clips of, let me remind you who you are and who you've come from. And we're not people that shrink back. And he starts giving example one after another, and there's, depending on how you count them, there's basically about 13 of these by faith and fill in the blank statements. So we've gone through quite a few of these. Last week we got, the first thing we did was got the definition of faith. And the definition of faith in 11:1 is, now faith is the confidence in what we hope for and the assurance about what we do not see. And we contrast belief and faith. And we've kind of held on to that through this whole series, because I think it's important. That's a wonderful definition, but I need a little more to kind of understand. And so we talked about what faith is living out our beliefs. And we can say we believe in prayer, but do we live that out? And we can say that God, we can't outgive God, but do we live it out? So faith is that putting that into practice, and confidence in what we hope for, and assurance of what we do not see. And then we started going through all these by faith statements. And last week we were at Abraham, and we saw how Abraham went where God directed him, but he didn't know where he was going. Crazy, isn't it? I told you I can relate to that because I've been lost most of my life, directionally lost most of my life. So what we learned is that faith is trusting the one that holds our future. So we rest in the confidence of faith, and sometimes God calls us to make those kind of steps, to put our feet in the direction of, we don't know where we're going. If we're believers long enough, it's probably going to happen if it hasn't already happened in your life. And so Abraham is that encouragement for us that God is trustworthy for this. Now, we're moving on to 3 more. We're going 3 more verses today. Honestly, before I started studying this, did not think about how all these are connected, but in Hebrews, they're very much so connected. So Abraham is kind of the first patriarch. He's a descendant of Noah. He's the first patriarch of the Israelites with this new covenant that God is going to establish with them. And then we're looking at the next 3 in line today. So Abraham has Isaac, Isaac has Jacob, and Jacob has Joseph, okay? And I'm probably going to mix those names up at some point today, because I'm going to use them interchangeably, and so you'll just have to go, oh, Marty, that's the wrong one. It was Jacob, not Isaac, and that's okay. So we're going to start working our way through these today and see why the Hebrews writer chose them. Yes, they're patriarchs, I get it, but they have a lot of history, and we're going to talk about how much of the Genesis is given to these 3 guys. 25 chapters of 50-some chapters of Genesis is the story of these three. Huge. And then the Hebrews writer picks one thing to commend them for. Very, very interesting. Of all the things he could say, he picks one. So we're going to look at that. So what is it about their lives that is valuable for this hurting group that is being persecuted? And they're in Rome. It's getting hot. I mean, there's lots of, their lives are endangered. And so what is it about that, about their lives, that would encourage them not to give up on their faith, not to back down, not to step away? So that's what we're going to be considering. And how does their practice, these patriarchs' practice of faith, speak to us as we learn to live out our beliefs? What is that? How can we apply that in our life? That's where we're going. Okay, that's where we're heading with this. So, like I just said, these three characters represent about half of Genesis, a big, big hunk of it. Now, they all have a role in their family in the promises that God made Abraham. Now, God makes at least three promises to Abraham. We kind of recognize these as the big three that the Israelites hold on to. The first is God promises them a land that will be their own, right? God promises them descendants, which becomes a nation, right? And God promises to protect them. Those are the three things. And God forms a covenant with them, and then they are to respond in their part of that covenant, which they struggle with, right? And that is that He is their guide. One God. He is their guide. So this promise that was given to Abraham starts to be passed along to his son Isaac, and then Jacob, and then also to Joseph. They're the keepers of the promise. So as we read this, I want you to look for a common theme. I want you to listen to how the Hebrews writer, it's just 3 verses, talks about each of these, and see if you can come up with a common thread that is with all 3 of these. Okay, so we're going to go to Hebrews 11, and we're looking at verses 20 through 22 this morning. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau in regard to their future. That's all we get on them. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and worshipped as he leaned on the top of his staff. And by faith, Joseph, when his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and gave instructions concerning the burial of his bones. Now, this is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Okay, all right, 25 chapters of history. That's what we get in Hebrews. Isn't that funny? 3 verses, and there's not a lot. Now, I want you to think about what is the common thread, and then we're going to talk about that in a second. But I'm going to give you a little bit of background. I'm going to try to not go too long on this, but I think with all these stories, you have to go back to Genesis to kind of get what in the world is he talking about when he's talking about this first one. We're just going to go through them one at a time. We'll do Isaac first, of course. Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau in regard to their future. So this is Isaac that we got introduced to last week. Abraham and his wife Sarah are older, and they are old of age. Sarah is unable. She has not birthed a child. She is unable to conceive, is what the Bible tells us. And Abraham has been blessed by God, has moved into the land that he's been promised to Canaan. And he looks around and goes, well, I guess my servant is going to be my heir because I don't have children. And God assures him that he will have a descendant. Now, the story gets really complicated because they take this into their own hands, we know. But God does exactly what God promised. And Isaac is the heir by which the promise for what becomes the Israelites, the descendants, will take place. So this is the same Isaac that Abraham understands that he's supposed to give him up. Very difficult story, very challenging story. But what happens is that God gives him another sacrifice that shows him that they won't be people of sacrificing their children. And this is what they're going to look like. And he gave them another sacrifice. So Abraham is commended for his faith. This is the Isaac that we're talking about. Okay, so Isaac, and sometimes these names start running together with me. Make sure I get it right. Yeah. Isaac marries Rebekah, okay? Isaac marries Rebekah, goes back to the same family line, marries Rebekah, and they have twin boys, Jacob and Esau, except it happens the other way. Esau and Jacob. Esau is the oldest. Now, this is where it gets really messy, right? Because Isaac favors Esau, and Rebekah favors Jacob. Thank you. See, and I'm telling you guys, this is good. There's a lot of names today. It's going to get crazy. So, as you know, that doesn't go well, right? That kind of favoritism in the family is a mess, absolutely. But that is exactly what happens. So Esau is the oldest, and he is positioned to receive a greater portion of the inheritance. That's how this worked in ancient culture, especially in this part of the world. So they would receive not necessarily all of the inheritance, but certainly a greater part of the inheritance. It would be his birthright, okay? So one day, he gives that up to Jacob for a good bowl of stew. Now, there might be somebody that lives in my family that would give up something like that if they were hungry. No, sorry, honey. For a great bowl of stew, but it better be a good bowl of stew, right? So he gives it up for that. And that's our first clue that this culture that the oldest is going to be favored is going to be challenged. That's our first clue of that. But it gets really blown out of the water a little bit later when Rebekah comes up with this plan, and her plan is to deceive Isaac so that Jacob receives the blessing. Now, this is where we go, all right, what is this blessing? What is this? Because it's very confusing that Jacob pretends like he is Esau and goes into his father, and he gets blessed, literally blessed by his father. It's the passing of leadership of the family is what it is. And so instead of it going to the eldest, it goes to Jacob because of deception. The deception actually works. Now, the giving of the blessing was a ritual for them, and often it was a ceremony, but it established the hierarchy of their family. Leadership, authority, but also inheritance was a part of it, and also social status. So basically, it moved the younger son, which was only a matter of maybe minutes or something. They're twins, but it moves him above his brother in social status, also inheritance, and also in the leadership of their family. But here's the big one about blessing. This is the trump of it all. It also represents God's favor, is how they saw that. And that's why when the blessing was given to Jacob, that Isaac would say, it is what it is. That's must be God's will. And it's understood as a part of God's will. And so he's not going to take it back, even though it came as deceptive. Even though it came under false pretenses, it's understood that this must be what God desires. And it was not retracted, although he actually blesses both of his sons. So the promise given to Abraham for land and descendants and divine protection, those three things, it was passed to Isaac, right? And so now Isaac is passing that to his son, specifically to Jacob as well. Now, this story pushes my justice buttons. Anybody else? I mean, it just does. I want to go, I'm sorry, that's not fair. Anybody else feel that? This is not fair. Pushes my justice buttons in big, big ways. But I want you to look past that for just a minute, because we're talking about faith here. We're talking about examples of faith. So if you look past that for just a second, by faith, Isaac passes the torch of God's promise to Jacob. Knowing he deceived, can you see how that would be a tremendous act of faith? Somehow God was in it. Somehow God was in it. It's how he's seeing it. He's being lifted up to these people through Hebrews because he acted on this in faith. By faith, or by the confidence in what we hope for and the assurance about what we do not see, Isaac trusted God to continue the promises of Abraham through his boys. Through his boys. It wouldn't stop. It would continue on. Okay? All right, so that's our first one. That's Isaac. Now let's move to Jacob. Here's what the scripture says just to remind you on Jacob. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and worshiped as he leaned on top of his staff. Whew, that's not a lot of a really long, long story. So the very Jacob that deceived his brother in order to get the blessing is the Jacob that we're talking about. So Jacob has 12 sons by 4 different women. You want to talk about a messy blended family? It's a messy blended family. I mean, it's crazy. His youngest 2 sons, Joseph and Benjamin, are his favorite because their mother is his favorite. So unfortunately, favoritism has been moved down to the next generation. So Joseph, we know, was favorite, and he has proven that to the other boys by giving gifts and things such as that. We know the coat of many colors is the great example of that. So here's Joseph. He is gifted, very gifted. He is somewhat overconfident, and he is privileged. He is privileged by his dad. It didn't go over so well with the big brothers, right? The big brothers aren't pleased with that at all. So what do? They come up with a scheme, and instead of killing him, they sell him into slavery. So he is sent to Egypt. They fake his death. His dad, Jacob, the very Jacob that we've been talking about, whose name is later changed to Israel, which is where we get Israelites from, Jacob thinks his dear son is dead. For 17, let me double check the number. I'm pretty sure that's right. For 17 years, no, I'm sorry, for about 13 years, sorry, got it wrong. For 13 years, he is enslaved in Egypt or imprisoned. 13 years. He started when he was 17 years old, but he has been enslaved. He has been wrongfully accused, and it seems to be happening over and over. But he has this God-given gift, and this gift is for interpreting dreams. And it is this gift in God's timing that he gets an ear with Pharaoh in Egypt. And because of his honesty and his ability to plan and to hear from God, he sets up a plan that not only saves the Egyptians, it saves other nations, including his people in Canaan. It is through this that this is like your 2-minute synopsis of Joseph's life. It is through this that he is reunited with his family, including his dad. Okay? So all of that happens. He is reunited. All right, wait a minute. I think I just went a little bit too far. No, okay. So his whole family moves to Canaan. And then Jacob, who has been reunited with all of them, with his sons and with both of Joseph, he meets Joseph's sons. He has 2 sons, all right? And this is what that text is talking about. His 2 sons are half Egyptian. Now remember the promise that has been trusted to Abraham, and it's for their people, right? Well, here is his now Abraham's great-grandchildren, I think would be the right one. They are here, and their father that has really, his obedience has saved the nation. And so Jacob, this is harder than you might think when you start putting these together. Jacob gives a blessing to Joseph's sons. Now, he actually has an opportunity to meet them and to bless them. It's this blessing talk again. This blessing gives the privilege of inheriting land to them. Well, what's the big deal, Marty? They're not full Israelites. They're not full Israelites, but they're given this privilege. Huge big deal. So this promise that has been given to Abraham by faith is being given to also to these grandchildren that aren't full Israelites. You see? Now you're writing to Jewish people. That's getting their attention as they read that. Okay, so that will be, that's Jacob. Now let's move to Joseph, because the stories just keep going. Joseph. By faith, Joseph, verse 22, when his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and gave instructions concerning the burial of his bones. You're like, how in the world does that have to do with faith? Does anybody else wonder about that? I mean, here's this guy, Joseph, who literally has endured all this hardship in his life. And he's lifted up as an example of faith because he says, don't leave my bones in Egypt. All right? That's crazy, isn't it? So let's look at this, because this is more special to me now, I think, than I have ever seen before. So the story goes on. The whole family has come to Egypt, and they have been saved because of Joseph's plan. So Jacob, the dad, is there, the whole family, the whole clan, and there's a lot of wealth. There's a lot of livestock and all to their family at this point. Jacob has lived in Egypt with all the family for 17 years. Okay? 17 years he is now. They're all in Egypt together. His sons, including Joseph, honor his wishes. Because Jacob says, I want to be buried back in Canaan, in our homeland. And so the boys, all 12 of them, go, okay. So what do? Joseph gets permission to leave Egypt and his duties and his responsibilities. They go back to Canaan and they bury their dad. He's very specific in where he wants to be buried. They do that. He's buried. Now, keep fast forwarding, because that's really important. The family returns to Egypt. Joseph lives another 54 years after Jacob dies. So he's getting up there in age now. He lives another 54 years. And the family is well established at this point. Joseph gets to see the third generation of his family. So he has the two boys that Jacob blessed, right? Remember that? Well, now one of them is a great-grandfather. It's the third generation. Joseph lives to be like 110. So he gets to see him. And it says, it's this really beautiful verse that you guys as grandparents will love. And it says that Manasseh's children were placed at birth on Joseph's knee. Isn't that cool? Isn't that a beautiful way of saying it? So he gets to experience his great, or at least great grandchildren and love them and see them. But they're still displaced. And remember the promise. Promise is for a land that is your own in descendants and safety. So Joseph makes this request. Now, it sounds a little bit like one his dad made, but it's different. He makes this request to have his remains taken to Canaan. Oh, well, that sounds just like Jacob, but it's not the same. But not at his death, like Jacob asked. He wants his remains taken when the whole family returns back home. It's a big deal. Now, they could have gone and buried him, just like they did his dad, but that's not what he asked for. See, he had an inroad with the Pharaoh because of his connection. His body was embalmed, and so was his father's through that whole Egyptian process. But he says, I'm staying here with my people until we go home. And when we go home, I'm going home too. I'm going with you. And it is this incredibly strong statement of faith. It's also prophetic. And it's going to be words that will be spoken to an enslaved people 100 years later that are going to hear our our forefather Joseph said, God is going to take us home, and he's going with us. And it was an act of faith. It was an act of faith that he would be able to return back. His request reflects faith in God's promise that came through his forefathers. It stands as a reminder to the future enslaved generation that God will do exactly what God had promised. That's exactly what will happen. I never really thought about that before. I love that the Hebrew writers brought that out. So what common thread do you see in this? What do you see? These three, what do they have in common? There's probably a lot of answers to that. I'm choosing one today, okay? And here, it's our big idea for today. And the one that I see that is so important is this. Faith is future focused. Faith is future focused. Hope in what I don't see. Confidence and hope and assurance in what I don't see. That's future. That is what hasn't happened yet. Faith is not just about the moment. Faith is what is coming next. What is about to happen. Passing the promise of God to the next generation was essential for the patriarchs to live out their faith. The only way the promises of God that were handed through Abraham would be known is if they tell the next generation, right? That's how it would happen. And they got that. It's future focused. A life of faith involves passing it down to the next generation. These founding fathers, they really understood that their legacy was really God's promises. It was really God's promises to their people. It was up to them to preserve those promises and to give it away to the next generation. Now, Jesus got this too. He understood that. He spent his ministry preparing the next to take over the ministry that he started. There's many examples of this, but the one I want us to look at is probably familiar to you is Matthew 28, 19, and 20. And right before his ascension, he gave them some really clear direction on what they were supposed to be doing. And here's what he said to them. He said, "Go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and in the Holy Spirit, teaching them," get that? "Teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you." So what are you doing? I've commanded you, and you're going to give it to the next, right? Pass it to the next generation. And they were so successful at that 2,000 years later, we have received that message. We are the recipients of their obedience to that message to pass it on to the next generation. Now, to be intentional at sharing the truths and the promises of God with the next generation and equipping them to live out their faith is our responsibility now. And I have a baton in my office. Actually, if I'd have brought my baton, we could practice it. We pass it from one to the next. And that's what we do. We have received God's promises, and now we have a responsibility to pass it to the next generation. But here's the question. How do we do it? How do we do that? So I'm going to share probably lots of answers to that too, but I got two things quickly that I want to share with you on how we do that. And here they are. I think one way that we pass on God's promises of ours to the next generation is through traditions. Now, that might sound kind of funny coming from me because I'm not a super traditional person, you probably know, but I think this is very much true. Let me give you an example. Why do we have Memorial Day holiday? Why do we have tomorrow off from work and we have flags around? Why do we do that? What's the significance of that? We have to remember. And if we don't have at least, hopefully remember more than one day a year, but if we don't have a holiday, a tradition, something to put that stake in the ground and said, today I won't forget. I might forget 364 days a year, but today I stop and I say, thanks be to God for those who have given their lives so that I can be free. But if those don't happen, if those holidays and those traditions aren't in place, will we remember? Will we? We have this, of course, in our faith as well. We have the church year that reminds us Advent as we embrace the coming of the Christ child, God incarnate, Lent, where we watch and we experience the love of God that is willing to sacrifice His very Son. Guys, if we don't have these things, we'll forget. And we won't pass it down to the next generation. And then Jesus Himself said, took two elements that were very common in the wine and the bread, and He said, do this often in remembrance of me. Why? Because we'll forget. We'll forget. And it gives us something tangible to hold on to. And Christ is present with us in that. And we can pass it on to the next generation. I think that I have challenges with traditions that we don't understand and we don't do a good job explaining. But they are very valuable. They're a tool that we use to inform the next generation of what has happened and to pass on God's promises. Here's a question for you. What's your family traditions that you pass the torch of faith to the next generation? What are those for you? Have you thought about that lately? What do you do that is passing of the promises of God to the next generation? How can you leverage holidays and traditions to pass your faith to the next generation? How can you do that? So you may need to make some changes and adjustments. The second way I think that we participate in passing our faith to the next generation is relationships. I mean, they really fit together. It's relationships in traditions. But I just kind of pulled that one out a little bit because I think it's very important to voice. Let me ask you this. Are we leveraging teachable moments with our children, with our grandchildren, with our great-grandchildren? Are we taking advantage? Jesus was the master of this. When something happened, it was an opportunity to speak about matters of faith. Are we looking for those? Are we asking God for those opportunities? And when they happen, are we stepping forward in that so that we can share and pass God's promises to the next generation? Here's another one I think is important. I'm not so good at this, but I think it's important. Are we writing down our God stories? Be good. Now it's super easy. Just grab your phone and you can just make a little video, right? You don't even have to write it down anymore. How are you preserving God's faithfulness in your life for the next generation? Are you telling your grandkids, kids, those stories? Let me tell you how God showed up one day. Let me tell you what God did in my life. Let me tell you the day I found the Lord, the day I renewed my commitment to God. Let me tell you, when I thought it was over, God did something big. We got to pass those stories down, guys. We've got to share that with the next generation so they have something to hold on to when they're like the guys in Rome who are being persecuted and are wanting to walk away from their faith, where they can say, my great-grandfather made it and I'm going to make it too. They didn't walk away their faith. I'm not going to walk away from mine either. How are we doing that? How are we preserving it? How are we doing that as a church? I have been given a huge gift in my life. I am the recipient of a legacy of prayer. My great-grandmother, it may have been before, it wouldn't surprise me, but I only know from my great-grandmother, prayed at the point of her death, and she lived well in her 90s, she had 92 children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and I think there was one great-great, if I remember right. 92! Crazy, isn't it? She prayed for every one of us by name every morning. I don't even know how she can remember all the names. I couldn't even told you all the names, but she knew them. Then my grandmother grabbed that baton and said, that's mine. She died at 93 years old or so, and her family was like 35, 40. At 5:30 every morning, she got up and she did the very same thing. She prayed for every one of her family members uh, by name, and until her sister passed away, they called at 5:30, and she'd get down on her knees and they would pray together for her families. And I'll watch my mom take that baton. There's very few mornings go by that we don't talk to her on the way to school, and the first thing she says to Molly is, "What, Molly? I prayed for you this morning." She's already done that. And she prayed for it. And now that legacy has been handed to me. What am I going to do with it? How am I going to share that with Molly so that her kids get it? Guys, we've been given a story of God's faithfulness. It is our responsibility in faith to share that for the next generation and as a church. How are we preserving? I've heard a lot of the stories, but I'm sure there's many I don't know. This church has been blessed when they've stepped out in faith. God has provided. We need to preserve those stories. I know a really good writer that probably could help with some of that. We need to preserve those and pass those along to the next generation. Faith is future